Would you believe it if I told you that a dog managed to save the life of its own drunk owner in the middle of the night, in the middle of a busy road in the United States? It looks like a movie scene, but it really happened. Imagine the danger: cars speeding past, headlights cutting through the darkness, and in the middle of this tense backdrop, a man staggering, completely vulnerable, unaware of the risk he was taking, and, next to him, the faithful four-legged companion who in a matter of seconds took an attitude capable of changing the fate of that night. What you will discover now may surprise you. Anyone who has a dog knows there is something almost inexplicable in the way they perceive the world. It's as if they see things we can't see, as if they sense dangers that don't even cross our minds. How many times have you noticed your dog reacting to something before you even realize it? Whether it's a stranger approaching, a different noise, or even a change in your mood, they just know. And that night, that instinct made all the difference between life and death. Have you ever been in a situation where you only later realized that someone, or even an animal, had protected you from something much bigger than it seemed? What is even more striking about this story is not only the act itself, but the intensity of the moment. For imagine the scene: silent dawn, only the distant sound of tires against the asphalt, and suddenly a drunk man without balance begins to walk in the middle of the road. Any driver who came would not have time to react. The danger was real, imminent, and inevitable. But that dog didn't hesitate. While the owner became more and more vulnerable, he immediately realized that he needed to act. Stay with me until the end, because every detail of this scene is able to move you. It's amazing how often we underestimate the intelligence and sensitivity of animals. They don't talk, they don't explain, but they act with almost surgical precision. And it is precisely in this contrast between the disoriented man and the dog on full alert that lies the strength of this story. On the one hand, human frailty steeped in recklessness. On the other, the unwavering loyalty of a furry friend who does not think twice before putting all his energy into saving a life. Have you ever stopped to reflect on how many occasions an animal can notice something that you let slip? The most incredible thing is to think that while the owner did not even understand what was happening, the dog was already plotting his strategy. Every second counted. Danger was approaching in the form of headlights and engines, but that dog refused to abandon his companion. He knew in his purest instinct that he needed to act fast. The bond between the two was put to the test in that instant, and it is exactly this invisible bond, made of love and loyalty, that makes the scene so exciting. This introduction is not just about an unlikely rescue, but about a powerful reminder. Heroes don't always wear capes, they sometimes wear leashes. And that's why this story becomes so striking, because it shows us that even in the most unlikely situations, courage can come from where we least expect it. And now, if you have already become curious about this beginning, get ready. What happened next will show that every detail of this dawn was worthy of a real thriller and emotion. And as you follow this almost unbelievable scene, you may also feel something moving inside. Because stories like this remind us that life can change in a matter of seconds, and that an animal's loyalty can be stronger than any words. If this topic makes sense to you, leave here in the comments what has touched you the most so far. It may be a memory with your own dog, or simply the emotion of imagining a scene like this happening. Reading what you feel creates a real connection, and that's what turns this space into a true community. And look, every time you like this type of content, it helps spread stories like this to many more people who also need to hear about courage, instinct, and unconditional love. It is a simple gesture, but it makes all the difference. And if you want to continue following stories of animal heroism, exciting reflections, and moments that make us rethink the relationship with these incredible companions, subscribe to the channel. Your participation here is what makes this space grow and reach more people with this type of message. Because deep down, it's not just about watching a video, but about sharing feelings, about creating a network where each experience adds up. And that's just the first part of this story. There's so much more for you to discover about that early morning when one dog impressively proved how far the strength of instinct and loyalty goes. He was an ordinary man, someone who could easily go unnoticed in the crowd. He worked hard during the day, carried heavy boxes, braved heat, rain, dust, and returned home almost always exhausted. Although he seemed just another anonymous face among so many, there was a tired look in him, loaded with untold stories, poorly resolved choices, and a restlessness that seemed to accompany him forever. That restlessness was what drove him almost every night to seek refuge in a nearby bar. There, between glasses of drink and passing conversations, I tried to anesthetize the mind, turn off thoughts and find some relief, albeit temporary. He was not a bad fellow. On the contrary, he was someone dear to his neighbors, helpful with friends, but who found it difficult to face his own loneliness when the silence of the night approached. And if the man seemed to live in this cycle of hard work and drunken nights, there was a constant presence that never failed to be there for him: the dog. Our dog, that so faithful, seemed to understand every detail of that routine, every step, every deviation. No matter what time the owner came, staggering or sober, there he was, waiting at the door with eyes shining with expectation. For many neighbors, it was even a reason for comments. They said that the connection between the two was different, almost supernatural, as if that animal was more than a simple pet. It was a silent guardian, a protective shadow that did not turn away for anything. This dog carried in itself an impressive energy. He was not only loyal, he was observant, attentive to everything. His dark eyes reflected something that seemed to overcome the barrier of animal instinct. He knew when the owner was sad, when he was angry, when he was frail. I also knew when the joy was genuine, and then I would jump, wag my tail, run in circles as if sharing the same emotion. On good days he was there to party. On bad days he lay quietly beside her, offering a calm, unwavering presence. It is curious to think how in the midst of the instability of human life, marked by decisions, mistakes, and successes, a dog can be the anchor that keeps us firm, as if it were a hidden truth that we don't always see, the unconditional love they offer, without asking for anything in return. On that particular night, the man had drunk more than usual. His steps were unsteady, his speech disconnected, his thoughts confused. He barely realized the vulnerability he was in. The dog, on the other hand, was restless. Those who live with animals know they perceive invisible signals, vibrations, energy changes that escape human eyes. The dog stared at the owner, attentive, almost anxious. It was as if I already sensed that something serious could happen. This sensitivity is striking because, in our own lives, how often do we ignore obvious signs of danger or wear and tear? And yet, there is always someone, a person, a friend, or even an animal, who notices before we do and tries to warn us. This bond between the two did not come out of nowhere. It was built over the years, day by day, in small attitudes. The dog has learned to wait patiently at the door, to accompany the owner on walks around the neighborhood, to lie at his feet on sleepless nights. He also learned to recognize every tone of voice, every movement, every look. This connection was the result of coexistence, of the constant repetition of small gestures of care and presence. And that is exactly where the true strength of loyalty lies, not in great isolated moments, but in the sum of small demonstrations of love and fidelity. Perhaps that is why, the instant the real danger presented itself on that dark road, the dog reacted without hesitation. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because we are not just talking about an exciting scene of heroism. We are facing something much greater, the reflection of the power of the bond between humans and animals, of the silent transformation that occurs when two lives intertwine so intensely that they become dependent on each other. While the owner sought refuge in drinks to escape his own thoughts, the dog remained steadfast, constantly reminding him of something he seemed to have forgotten: the importance of presence, affection, and genuine connection. This is a powerful revelation, one that many only understand when faced with extreme experiences, the impact such a relationship can have on our journey. Some believe that dogs are mirrors of the soul of their owners. They observe, absorb, and return what they see, but in a pure, non-judgmental way. Perhaps there is a lot of truth in this. Because even when the man showed his weaknesses, his mistakes, and his excesses, the dog remained there as if to say, "I will not abandon you, even if you are not at your best." This is not just loyalty. It is transformation in a raw state, because it forces us to reflect on our own choices and realize that often the truest love is the one that remains even in the worst days. The curious thing is that, without even realizing it, the owner had already been protected for a long time. It wasn't just that morning that the dog would be his hero. On so many other occasions, he had already avoided problems, pushed away dangers, called attention to situations that could have turned into something worse. Behind the scenes of life where no one sees, these moments quietly accumulate, and when they finally emerge into something extraordinary, like what happened that night, they seem like miracles. But the hidden truth is that they are the fruits of a continuous journey, made of attention, instinct, and unconditional love. This story, therefore, is not just about a dog that drags its drunken owner off a road. It's also about how seemingly small everyday decisions shape their lives. It's about how loyalty can be a beacon in the midst of darkness. And it's about how, even when we're not conscious, someone can be looking out for us behind the scenes. Perhaps this is the biggest revelation of all. We are not as alone as we sometimes think we are. And before we move on to the more intense part of this narrative, I want to make a space for you. Because stories like this not only serve to excite, but to provoke reflection. How many times have you counted on the silent presence of someone, person or animal, who reminded you of what really matters? Have you ever experienced moments when you only later realized how much you were protected without even noticing? If this reflection hit you hard, write there in the comments. This makes sense to me. At that dawn, the streets were almost deserted, but not silent. Absolute silence never exists in a city. There is always a distant echo, a sound that cuts through the air, be it the rumble of an engine, the whistle of the wind beating against metal plates, or the barely noticeable hum of the lamps that illuminated isolated sections of the road. It was a cold, damp scene that carried with it a heavy atmosphere, as if every detail conspired to amplify the sense of risk. The man was walking there, with no clear awareness of where he was. His steps were slow, dragging, as if each of them required more effort than the previous one. His head hung forward, his hunched shoulders betrayed the weight not only of fatigue, but of the drink that overpowered him. Alcohol acted like a thick fog, clouding his senses, confusing his perception of space and time. His body swayed from side to side, unable to maintain balance for more than a few seconds. At times it looked like it was going to fall to the ground, but in an almost automatic reflex, it managed to pull itself together, only to falter again afterwards. Anyone who looked from the outside would see a man struggling with his own gravity, caught between consciousness and unconsciousness, walking towards a destiny that could be fatal. The road, which was supposed to be only a short crossing to the comfort of one's own home, turned into a field of traps, where every detail could turn into tragedy. The dog followed, restless. His body was tense, ears raised, eyes attentive to the slightest movement. With each misstep of the owner, the animal approached closer, as if trying to stabilize it with its own presence. Instinct warned him that something was deeply wrong. It was not just the constant staggering, but the environment around. The road did not forgive distractions. It was a stretch known for sharp turns, poor lighting, and drivers passing at high speed, confident that at that time there would be no one crossing. But there was. And it was exactly this collision between human recklessness and the relentless pace of traffic that formed the scene of imminent danger. The exact moment the man approached the middle of the track was like a break in time. There was no reflection, only the irrational impulse to keep walking without measuring the risk. For him, maybe it was just another step, but in practice it was the step that launched him into an invisible line between life and death. The strip of dark asphalt, illuminated only by spaced poles and distant headlights, seemed to swallow him every second. It was as if the whole scenario was set for an inevitable denouement, and the dog was the only one who noticed it. The animal began to pull on the leash, first lightly as if trying to attract attention, but the man, intoxicated, did not react. His half-closed eyes saw only blurs. The lights of the lampposts mingled with the stars, and the sound of the engines came muffled, as if from a dream. However, the danger was real, so real that it could materialize at any moment. This is the hidden truth of life. In our fragility, all it takes is one out-of-place detail, one thoughtless choice, for everything to change. The feeling of imminence increased with every step. The dog growled low, pulled tighter, insisted, as if shouting without a voice, "Get out of there now!" The headlights of a car appeared in the distance, first as two small white dots in the darkness, then growing rapidly, violently cutting through the space. Every second, the scene was filled with tension. The man's body was exactly where it shouldn't be, vulnerable, exposed, and he didn't even notice. Fate could be sealed in moments, but the dog understood. The suspense was not only in the proximity of the vehicles, but in the silent struggle between human unconsciousness and animal determination. On the one hand, the mind numbed, unable to comprehend the seriousness of the situation. On the other, the sharp instinct of a being who, even without human logical reasoning, understood urgency with absolute clarity. This contrast revealed the full intensity of the scene: a man blind to the danger he himself had caused, and a dog who took it upon himself to save, no matter what the cost. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this scene is not just about an accident about to happen. It also tells us about the invisible decisions we make at every moment, decisions that often seem banal, but carry within them the power to change entire destinies. The man, indulging in drink and aimlessly walking along the road, was not aware that he was crossing a dangerous border. But each step was in fact a choice, and each choice opened up a range of consequences that could be irreversible. This is the framework of our own journeys. When we think we are just living any night, we are actually facing revelations that can define the course of life. Meanwhile, the dog did not accept being a mere spectator. His body protruded against the owner's, his teeth grabbed the bar of his clothes, his paws steady on the damp asphalt. He didn't just try, he acted. I was the only balancing agent in that scene. The inevitable that night took the form of vehicles speeding by, drivers who would never have time to react. And the dog, small in front of the greatness of the road, became the decisive piece to prevent the disaster. The seconds dragged on as if time had slowed down. The noise of another car approached. The beam of light cut through the darkness with violence, and the man's wavering figure seemed more and more exposed. The dog, in a desperate impulse, did more than pull on the leash. He rushed forward at once, dug his teeth into the fabric of his pants, and began to drag him with all the strength he had. The man, confused, tried to resist, stumbled, grumbled, unable to understand what was happening. But the determination of the animal was greater than any human confusion. He knew he needed to act fast, because every second was a race against something that could change everything in the blink of an eye. This scene alone gives us a powerful revelation. It shows that in many moments of life, we are not the ones who have the clarity to see the danger. We are so immersed in distractions, in unconscious decisions, in altered states of mind, that we become vulnerable. And it is precisely in these moments that someone or something intervenes. It can be a loved one, an unexpected friend, or even an animal. The impact of these interventions is profound. They pull us back to reality, save us from consequences we didn't even think we were about to face. The tension at that point was unbearable. The headlights of the oncoming car already illuminated part of the road, reflecting off the man's body, while the dog fought his unconscious resistance. The strength of the animal came not only from its muscles, but from the invisible bond that bound it to its owner. It was this bond that nourished his courage, that made him not give up, not let go, not hesitate. He knew, on some instinctive level, that man's life depended on him. This is the part of the story where human vulnerability meets animal courage, where the unconsciousness of one clashes with the determination of the other. And it is in this shock that something transformative is born. The awareness that we do not control everything, that we often need to be saved from ourselves. And when that happens, the impact is so great that it changes not just the instant, but the entire journey. Write in the comments, "I'm on this journey too." At that instant, when the owner's body swung more and more to the center of the road, something in the dog completely changed. Until then, he watched, growled low, pulled the leash in an attempt to restrain the movement. But at that moment, his instinct exploded into an urgency that left no room for doubt. His eyes widened, fixed on the man's staggering shadow and the headlights approaching in the distance. His heart raced, every muscle alert, as if his entire body had been programmed for a single mission: to protect. There was no human rationality there, no logical reflection, just an invisible force that said with absolute clarity, "If I don't act now, I'm going to lose what matters most." The animal accurately perceived something the owner could never understand in that condition: the invisible mathematics of risk. He felt the speed of vehicles, calculated the distance from danger, measured the road space, and knew almost supernaturally that every second counted. While for man, everything was a confused blur, for the dog, everything was clear. He could hear the rumble of the engines growing in the early morning. He could feel the vibration of the ground with each approaching car, and he understood, with the clarity of instinct, that this was not just another clumsy ride. It was a race against time. There is something fascinating about the intensity of this animal perception. Many times we humans believe we are the owners of consciousness, but we forget that there are levels of attention that go beyond rational logic. The dog, without words, without complex calculations, could access the essence of the situation. There was an extreme danger and he needed to intervene. It is at this point that the hidden truth of the bond between man and animal is revealed, when one takes it upon himself to see what the other cannot. The growl grew louder, almost a grunt of despair. Paws settled on the wet asphalt, and on an impulse, he lunged at the owner, firmly biting the bar of his pants. It was not just any tug, it was the concentrated strength of a whole body, small in comparison to the greatness of the road, but charged with inordinate courage. The man, stunned, tried to resist, still not understanding what was happening. For him, it was just a nuisance. For the dog, it was the line that separated life from death. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because it's not just a protective reflex, but something much bigger. What we see here is the pure manifestation of an instinct that, over centuries, has been molded in dogs to care for their group, to protect those they consider part of their pack. This guardian mentality does not need sophisticated training. It does not need command. It exists because the bond between the two had already been built in every detail of coexistence. The dog wasn't just saving someone by chance. He was saving the one who represented the whole meaning of his own journey. This kind of animal perception forces us to reflect on our own choices. How often do we ignore clear signs of danger, insist on decisions that put us at risk, close our eyes to revelations that life presents us with, simply because we are immersed in our own distractions? The man was not aware of the risk he was taking, but the dog, with his extreme attention, saw what was hidden. It is as if there is a silent hoop of existence, where invisible forces work to protect us from ourselves. The impact of that is immense. Imagine for a moment the scene from the point of view of the animal. Each approaching lighthouse represented an invisible enemy. Each noise of the engines was a warning that time was running out. He did not calculate with numbers, but he felt with his body, with his skin, with his heart. This is the great revelation. While the owner was lost, without direction, the dog accessed a level of consciousness that we ourselves, in our arrogance, often forget to value. This heightened awareness is also a reflection of the transformation that occurs when there is a deep bond. The dog was not just reacting to the environment, but reacting to the state of the owner. He felt the instability, the weakness, the vulnerability, and this direct connection between them made him act even more purposefully. It was not just about surviving, it was about keeping alive the one who was your reference, the center of your world. Behind the scenes of this scene, there was a silent and fierce love that surpassed any logical explanation, and the stronger this perception became, the more he insisted. Paws crawled on the asphalt, claws tried to find support, teeth held firmly. He wouldn't let go, he wouldn't back down, he wouldn't hesitate. There was something transformative about that act, the courage of an animal overcoming human weakness, the instinctive decision to face the inevitable with everything it had. This clash between vulnerability and determination creates an emotional impact that forces us to rethink our own journeys. The owner, still confused, did not understand why he was being pulled so hard. But every movement of the dog was a silent cry of urgency. He was saying, "You don't see it, but I see it. You don't feel it, but I do. And for that, I will act for both of us." This is the essence of true loyalty. It is not waiting for a command. It is not acting only when asked. It is to take control when the other does not succeed. It is to be the guardian in the moments when consciousness fails. And while the cars continued to cut the road with violence, the dog stood firm, locked in an invisible battle against time. Every second seemed to last an eternity. Every light that appeared in the distance was a cruel reminder that danger would not wait, but he wouldn't give up. His perception kept him active, attentive, as if he could foresee all possible outcomes. And for him there was only one acceptable way: to save the owner. This keen perception, this absolute instinct, is one of the greatest lessons animals offer us. They show us that survival often depends not only on logic or reason, but on the ability to feel, to be attentive, to react without delay. This is the hidden truth that the scene reveals. We do not need words to understand the danger. We need presence, extreme attention, courage to act at the right moment, and it is at this very moment in history that the contrast reaches its peak. The man, frail and disoriented, was just a body exposed on the road. The dog, on the other hand, was the manifestation of strength, of clarity, of decision that does not hesitate. The vulnerability of one and the courage of the other merged into a risky dance, in which every step could mean life or death. And yet, in that bleak scenario, it was instinct that guided the course, proving that even without rationality, an animal could see deeper than a human plunged into unconsciousness. Write in the comments, "This makes sense to me." He did not pull. He braked his body, lowered his center of gravity, dug his nails into the wet asphalt and bit into the fabric of his pants as if he were holding his own life with his teeth. It was an internal snap, a command that came from a place before words. The first snatch did not displace the owner even an inch. It just tore off a thread of fabric and left a taste of dust and rubber in the dog's mouth. The second, longer one, caused the man to lose his axis and take a crooked step out of the center lane. And the third, the one that mixed strength and despair, finally moved the heavy body in the direction of the shoulder, while two beams of light swept through the pitch and the hot wind from the tires bit the skin of both. The sound of the car passed tearing like a household thunder, so close that the dog felt his tail hit the void, and the owner, not knowing anything, cursed something that even he did not hear. The dog did not let go. He took a short breath, pulled again, and the rough creak of the fabric giving way turned trail of the scene. The man was dead weight and confused endurance. He tried to lift his foot and tripped over his own shoelace. The hand sought some support in the dark and only found the air. The body toppled over, and for a moment the knee scraped the asphalt, drawing a sting that drunkenness could not extinguish. The dog used the error in favor. When the owner fell, gravity helped to shift him a few more palms out of the line of impact. There was no conscious strategy, but there was an intelligence of the body, that mysterious sum of reflexes, memory, and love that becomes a plan of action when there is no time. The dog hooked his teeth again, repositioned his paws, dragged to the side. Every inch seemed to cost minutes of life. The noises from the road came in waves, first a metallic rustle, then a low crescendo, and finally the hiss of approach, followed by the brief explosion of the passage. The light from the headlights opened and closed like a giant eye, illuminating for a second the dust particles, the texture of the gravel, the sheen of saliva on the dog's fur. The smell was a mixture of oil, wet earth, and sweaty cloth. The dog perceived everything and transformed everything into energy. The vibration of the ground that gave away a distant vehicle, the shadow that moved at the edge of the pole, the cold at the tip of the muzzle warning that there was free space left. To those watching afterwards, it looks like heroism. For those who live within, it is pure necessity. He adjusted the bite higher so as not to tear the entire bar and pulled in the rhythm of the beats themselves. 3 short pulls, 1 long, pause for breath, repeated. The owner, half in a trance, let out a stop, stop. But even he did not believe the command, he said. His world was a mosaic of flashes and noises, a blurred figure that lost and regained contours. The legs were heavy, the head was spinning, the stomach was contrary. Still, when the dog's teeth clenched tighter, the body reacted as if recognizing an ancient call. It did not understand the message, but obeyed the impulse to let go. It was enough for the dog to gain more space. On the shoulder, there was no protection. It was a strip of loose stone pebble that cut through the pad of the paws. The dog felt the burning, an inconspicuous trickle of blood, and pulled anyway. Down a car blew wind and dust over them, and for an instant the scene seemed to freeze. The man half kneeling, trying not to tip over on his stomach. The dog bent over, hind legs stretched out, shoulders stiff, neck tense. The noise passed, the dust settled, and the dog stole 2 more handfuls to the shore. The clothes scratched the floor, leaving behind a mat trail, like chalk on the board. And it was on this streak that life began to double in direction. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because we tend to romanticize the moment, to call it a miracle or luck, but there is a silent engineering behind this courage. It is a mentality shaped by coexistence, by daily micro-decisions, by a hidden truth that accompanies you when you are not looking. The one who loves observes. Those who observe predict, and those who predict act before the catastrophe happens. The dog did not think about probabilities. but read the scenario as if deciphering an ancient language. Wind, vibration, light, smell, weight of the owner's body, texture of the floor. Put it all together in a sensory map, and that map turned direction. When we talk about transformation and impact, sometimes it sounds like motivational speech, but here it's literal. Each tug rewrote that man's journey, millimeters at a time. And the most impressive thing is that the force that moved the scene did not come from muscles alone. It came from a tacit pact, those that do not need to be signed. I take care of you when you cannot take care of. Behind the scenes for thousands of days, this pact was being rehearsed. The next night it became an act. The road, in turn, followed indifferently. A distant truck purred like wild animal. The echo hit the walls of a low building, came back heavy. A shorthorn, annoyed, burst out like a burst of laughter out of time, and the man, frightened, turned his trunk to the wrong side, almost returning to the track. The dog intercepted the recoil with its body. A dry shock, shoulder with thigh, and the firm bite prevented regression. He took a deep breath, and in a sort of throw of himself, attached all his weight to his forelegs, gained traction, and dragged. Anyone who has ever tried to pull someone on the ground knows the first displacement is the wall. Then inertia becomes an ally. The dog felt when the wall gave way an invisible exchange and took advantage of the slack. The scene had a strange design. The dog on its side, almost parallel to the owner's body, to multiply the drag. The tongue out, the breath wheezing, the man with one hand open trying to grab nothing, the other in his pocket trying to save some object that had not the slightest importance in the face of urgency. Suddenly a wallet slipped, snapped on the floor, scattered cards. The dog did not swerve. If I had a vision of accounts, I would let everything win. The code of that hour had a single line: take the owner of the border from the impact. The heat from the engines came before the cars, as a harbinger. The dog then synchronized the effort with the pauses of the road. It pulled hard in the silences, stabilized during the passages. There was no written calculation, but there was kinesthetic wisdom. When a sedan passed too close, the trail of air smeared the man's eyes with dust, and he reflexively brought his hand to his face. The gesture opened the trunk axis, facilitating a turn. The dog took advantage of the diagonal and shifted the entire body another meter. The sum of chance, guided by a heart instinct, began to impose itself on chaos. The owner grumbled something along the lines of, "Where are we?" The question did not seek an answer. It was only a noise that the mind makes when it needs to hear itself. He was caught between two realities: the comfortable lie that he would get home as usual, and the uncomfortable revelation that one more step might be his last. The dog did not negotiate with lies or with conveniences. He operated in the regime of truth. There was danger, there was less danger, so that's where they would go. The simple is often the most sophisticated engineering. The asphalt ran out and gave way to a rammed earth embankment. The change in texture made the owner's body slip more easily, and the dog, for a very brief moment, almost fell on its back, as if pulling a heavy suitcase down a step. He repositioned his legs diagonally, found a foothold on the concrete ledge, and used the column itself as a bar. The owner half turned on his side, and in this turn his face met the dog's eyes. There was a flash of recognition, a clean frame in the flickering film of consciousness. Perhaps he did not understand everything, but he understood enough. That tug was not against him. It was for him. A hatchback drove by with loud music, and a laugh leaked out the window. No one saw the scene. No one saw the hand tremble and then give way. No one saw the dog's chest inflate like an old bellows. No one saw the two of them move enough for the hull of a truck, 5 seconds later, to spit wind without touching. This is the drama and miracle of real stories. Most heroism happens in the dark, without witness, behind the scenes of the night, where what is decided is silent and definitive. And when someone finally tells, it feels like a screenwriter's invention. With each small victory, the dog gained a moral breath, and the owner a literal breath. The crackles of gravel under the weight sounded like stone applause, unobtrusive, very discreet, but applause. Man's breathing began to organize into more stable cycles, which helped reduce passive resistance. The dog noticed the change and adapted the cadence. Instead of starts, a continuous, firm, obstinate traction. The tail, rather between the legs, lifted a little, not for relief but for focus. On the animal's internal map, the escape route lay beyond a crooked pole and a crumpled sign. He calculated, in the language of smell and sound, that there the margin was wider and went there. A car honked, this time longer, not in annoyance but in late warning. The horn went down the man's spine like a tooth of ice, and in a reflex he tried to stand. It was half a hit, half a miss. The foot failed, the body threatened to return to the track, and the dog responded with a lateral stride that redirected the axis. It is curious how at certain hours, the best decision is not to stand. It is to slide, it is to accept the line of least friction. It is to allow someone to lead you. There is a lesson in mentality there, hidden in the mud and in the rush. Control is not always the safest way to move forward. Sometimes the wisdom is to give in. The cold of the dawn stuck to the skin like film paper. The dog trembled a little, not only from exertion but from adrenaline rush. The tongue hung dripping, and the hot halite drew small clouds in the ragged light of the pole. Still there was no hesitation. When a piece of the pants finally broke, he did not waste a second. He climbed the bite to the belt, dug into the thickest fabric, and there he found a strap. That little canine ingenuity repositioning in thousandths was worth meters. The owner, semi-supported on the hip, turned in a drag of body that looked like a half-moon on the floor. If someone described it, they would say it was ugly. If someone measured it, they would say it was accurate. At one point, the clock on a distant building struck 2, and the metallic sound traveled slowly as if through gelatin. The dog ignored the time of men. His time was beat and beacon. In the chest count, there were a few pulls left to the zone that memory associated with bush smell, a strip of thin grass, which promised less danger than loose stone and tire. The owner tried to say the name of the dog, and the name came out like a sound shadow. It wasn't a call, it was a memory. The animal did not look back. The look of the hero, when he is a hero, aims at the place where he is going. Finally, the man's boot hit a piece of discarded tire, and that obstacle became leverage. The dog used the object as if the world had given him a tool. Pulled, supported, slid. 2 more cars, 2 quick passes, 2 gusts of wind that stirred the grass and the hair on the loin. The corner of the dog's mouth was bleeding a little, nothing to indicate that he had given up. The owner, skinned dirty, began to understand in the body what the mind did not yet translate. To leave there was the only decision that mattered. And in that dumb deal, the weight got lighter. The crooked pole was left behind, and with it the narrowest part of the shoulder. The margin opened a span. It's amazing how a span, at the right time, can be the difference between a scare and a tragedy. The dog noticed the amplitude and repositioned the path, leading the owner to a diagonal that moved the body away from the flow and aligned it with the thin vegetation. The ground changed again. Less stone, more earth, and the drag became slippery, which accelerated the displacement. The man's clothes drew soft rails on the damp clay. The road behind remained the road, indifferent as it always was. Ahead, a pause began. It wasn't an end, it was a respite. And in that breath, the dog released its bite, took 2 steps back to take a breath, looked the owner up and down, and in a gesture that only those who live recognize, rested its muzzle on his arm as if to say, "Continue." It was a short touch, no whining, no theatrics. The man, dirty and grated, found there a thread of consciousness. The hand which once sought emptiness now found the ground and served as a support. It wasn't strength yet, it was intent. And intention, when the night is just around the corner, is the beginning of the turn. Overhead, a window lit and went out fast like a timid eye of the city. No one screamed. No one came down. No one interfered. There are scenes that belong to those who live them and to no one else. The dog resumed the position next to the owner's waist, but this time, instead of biting, he pushed with his shoulder, guiding, not dragging. With each micro-advance, the world rearranged the risks. A silent revelation prevailed. Sometimes the first hero of our life is the one who does not know what heroism is, knows only what bonding is. The wind cooled. The road slowed down a tone. The dog felt in the air the presence of something big approaching, heavy, with the kind of noise that does not forgive distractions. The night was not over. The dangers had signed no surrender, and what was to come would require more than traction. It would require coordination. Between one breath and another, the dog turned his body to a new position, calculating with his body the curve of the terrain, as if preparing the next sequence of movements. He said, "That makes sense to me." His body was heavy, limp as if made of soggy cloth, and his mind navigated between disconnected flashes. The first impulse was to resist, to push the force that was dragging him, as one who refuses help, because he does not understand where it comes from. The taste of alcohol still burned in the mouth. The scrambled vision mixed shadows and lights into indecipherable spots, and in the depths of consciousness there was a dumb question. What is happening to me? He could not understand why he was being pulled so violently, why the clothes seemed to catch on something stronger than the floor itself. With each stride, a wave of irritation and confusion swept over him, as if he were being attacked. The human instinct, even drunk, tried to regain control, but there was no logic at that moment. The hands sought support, but found only emptiness. The eyes, half closed, saw only blots. The horn of a car in the distance sounded like thunder inside the head, amplifying panic and disorientation. He tried to swear, tried to rise, but the body did not obey. Drunkenness turned every reaction into a slow caricature, as if trapped in a bad dream. And it was in this state of absolute vulnerability that discomfort began to turn into fear. The feeling of being pulled no longer made sense as an attack, but as a strange force pulling him from somewhere, even though he didn't know exactly where or why. Meanwhile, the dog did not hesitate. His teeth were set, his whole body vibrating in urgency. With each new attempt of the owner to break free, he responded with more pressure, more pulls, more determination. The man, confused, did not realize that the growing roar of engines and the piercing light of headlights were not delusions, but closer and closer realities. Each beacon flash that invaded his scrambled vision seemed like just a random flash. But the dog knew the difference. It wasn't just lights, it was threats approaching too quickly. And when a car passed so close that the wind kicked up dust and stirred the man's hair, finally a spark of lucidity arose. He realized, albeit for a brief second, that he might have been hit. The confusion, however, was still greater than the clarity. He tried to rise, but his legs gave way, tripping over the unevenness of the ground again. The dog, in response, locked the body and pulled even more firmly. The rude dragging seemed painful, but also necessary. The man felt his skin scrape on the ground, the fabric of his clothes give way, but with each meter away from the asphalt, a strange mixture of resistance and relief began to take shape inside him. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because this scene is not just about a drunk owner and an insistent dog. It's also about how we react when we don't understand what's going on. Often in life, we are pulled out of dangerous situations without realizing the real risk. We resist, we fight, we complain, because the mind is trapped in the illusion of control. But the hidden truth is that at certain times, it is precisely by giving up this false control that transformation happens. The dog, with its insistence, played this role of external force that guides us when we do not see. And the owner, with his confusion, represented all of us in situations where we do not understand the decisions that life makes for us. This insistence of the dog is more than animal stubbornness. It is the reflection of a bond that does not break even in the face of misunderstanding. He didn't give up because he knew on an instinctive level that giving up would mean losing everything. And that instinct is also a powerful metaphor. How often does life insist on pulling us off dangerous roads, even when we resist, blinded by our own choices? How often does a friendship, a piece of advice, a strong intuition drag us against our will, only to later understand that it was what saved us? The suspense at that point was not only in the risk of the cars, but in the confrontation between the ignorance of man and the wisdom of the animal. The owner didn't understand, couldn't put the pieces of the scene together, but felt the impact of being forced away. It was painful, uncomfortable, humiliating even, but it was necessary. The dog, on the other hand, acted without hesitation, guided by a clarity that did not depend on logic. He didn't have to explain, he didn't have to ask permission, he just did. And it was precisely this tireless action that kept the owner alive, even if the latter still did not realize the scale of what was happening. The man's body kept giving way, now trying to get up, now falling again. Their confused murmurs were drowned out by the sound of the road. His thoughts, scrambled, were unable to recognize the danger to its full extent. But little by little, the dog's insistence began to impose itself. With each pull, with each drag, he was being taken out of the zone of greatest risk. The initial discomfort gave way to a strange sense of displacement, as if something bigger was happening, even though he couldn't comprehend it. This insistence is the essence of the scene. It was not a single act of heroism, but a sequence of quick and repeated decisions, each of them determined by a love that does not accept to refuse. The dog did not let go, did not decrease in strength, did not give signs of giving up. He ignored the confusion, heaviness, and resistance of the owner because he knew that the life of man depended on his persistence. It was an invisible duel between unconsciousness and clarity, and in that duel clarity won at every pull. This contrast between human confusion and animal determination is what makes this scene so striking. It's a reminder that we don't always have to understand to be saved. Sometimes understanding comes later, as a late revelation, when we are already safe and can look back. But in the heat of danger, salvation happens in the silent insistence of someone who does not give up on us, even when we do not understand. He says, "I'm on this journey too." The noise of the engines seemed to multiply and fill the entire space. What had once been just a lone car cruising through the night now turned into a constant stream of vehicles that appeared at ever shorter intervals, as if the road had suddenly awakened, testing the courage and endurance of that duo. The dog felt everything in his body, every vibration of the asphalt under his paws, every change in the air that gave away the speed of approaching cars. The owner, on the other hand, still caught up in the mess of drinking, did not understand the seriousness of the scene. Their disconnected groans, mixed with futile attempts to let go, sounded like childish protests in the face of a force that would not admit of giving up. What he didn't realize was that every tug, every rude drag was becoming the fine line that kept him from death. The dog gasped, breathed in short, accelerated cycles, but his determination was greater than any fatigue. The heart was pounding, the muscles were already burning, but nothing in him pointed to retreat. He wasn't just trying to survive, he was taking responsibility for a life that, at that moment, depended entirely on his insistence. The headlight of a truck illuminated the scene for endless seconds. The flash revealed the man being dragged, clothes torn, knees shredded, face marked by an expression of confusion and frailty. The driver, unable to understand the scale of what was happening there, just honked from afar and drove on, leaving behind dust and a trail of tension. Every passing vehicle was a concrete threat. The displacement of air blew dust, stirred the man's hair, raised small particles that scratched the skin. But for the dog, all this was just another obstacle to ignore. He was not distracted, he did not divert focus. With each new approach of headlights, he redoubled the force, adjusted the bite to another point on the fabric, found a new way to pull. It was as if a hidden intelligence guided him, allowing him to predict the invisible movements of the road, and with every inch conquered, he turned the impossible into real breakthrough. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because this race was not just a physical fight against cars, it was also a powerful metaphor for all the silent battles we fight on our own journeys. The dog dragged the owner away from a danger that he himself did not see. And how many times in life does not exactly this happen to us? We are stuck with our choices, blind to the consequences, and yet there are forces, friends, family, intuitions, circumstances, that push us even against our will away from what could destroy us. This is the hidden truth of this scene. Salvation does not always come by understanding, but by the insistence of something or someone who does not give up on us. The man was still lost in his confusion. For him, everything seemed just discomfort, pain in his arms, burning in his face, the feeling of being dragged along without understanding why. But the scenario seen from the outside was a timed battle against the inevitable. Every beacon that appeared in the distance was a sentence about to be served. Every engine rumble was a reminder that the margin between life and death was narrowing. The road, indifferent, continued to spit out cars and more cars, and the dog was the only one who understood the urgency of the moment. With each step, the bond between them became more evident. The dog wasn't just pulling an inert body, it was carrying a whole story of togetherness, a silent friendship, a loyalty built behind the scenes of years of companionship. It was this bond that fueled his strength. Because in the end, it was not the instinct of self-preservation that moved him, but the instinct to protect the one who, despite not realizing it, was the center of his existence. That's the real impact, realizing that love and loyalty can generate enough energy to meet any danger. Traffic did not decrease, on the contrary, it seemed to increase. The dawn was no longer an empty space, but a noisy stage, where every horn became a soundtrack to a real thriller. The dog, seized by urgency, seemed to multiply forces. He didn't think about giving up. He didn't think about stopping. With each pull, His body silently said, "You will not stay here, I will not allow it." And somehow this certainty prevailed over all the chaos, as if it were more powerful than the horns, than the lights, than the cars tearing through the dark. Even when the man resisted, pulling in the wrong direction, or falling in such a way as to make the rescue even more difficult, the dog did not weaken. Each obstacle was a new challenge, and he always responded with more force, more persistence, more focus. It was as if there was only one rule inside him: don't let go. And that rule was unbreakable. The man gradually began to feel that he was not alone. Even though his mind was not able to comprehend, somewhere deep in his consciousness, there arose the feeling that there was a greater force working in his favor. The suspense reached unbearable levels. The headlights of the cars cast gigantic shadows on the walls of distant buildings, creating an almost cinematic backdrop. With each new flash, it seemed that death approached another step. But the dog, insistent, continued. He was not just an animal reacting to instinct. He was the personification of a force that does not give up, that insists to the end. This race against danger is also a lesson in mindset. How often, in the face of invisible threats, do we have to trust those who insist on us? How often is the discomfort we feel not punishment, but salvation? Life in many moments drags us from dangerous places, and only later do we understand that what seemed painful was in fact an act of protection. It is a revelation that can only be understood by looking back when we are already safe. And that early morning, as the road followed spitting cars and the dog persisted, a story of transformation was being written. The man still did not understand, but his fate was being changed with every tug, and the dog, tireless, kept leading him, inch by inch, out of the line of danger, not caring about the effort, not caring about the pain, not caring about anything but saving the life of the one he loved. He said, "That makes sense to me." The truck that had been weighing the night announced its presence before appearing. A serious snore that seemed to come out of the ground, vibrating on the stones, running through the body of the two of them like an ancient warning. The dog had already turned his body to that new position, measuring the curve of the terrain with his own chest, and when the glare of the headlights finally cut through the pitch, he turned everything into action. It stuck its paws where the slope gave way, sought grip on the damp earth and pulled the owner diagonally, as if making a maneuver thought and rehearsed, but that, in fact, was born of the pure instinct of survival. The man, half on his side, tried to lift the trunk, failed, and the weight returned to the ground, which paradoxically helped the drag to slide. A dry thud of the bumper against the air passed a few meters, throwing a hot breath that turned into dust. But this time, instead of panic, the wind brought momentum. The body gave way to the right side. The dog gained centimeters, and these centimeters began to look like meters. Behind the crooked pole was an earthen crevice with thinning grass. It was not real shelter, but it was as close to it as the road offered. The dog, sniffing the air as if reading invisible coordinates, chose the slit. It bit higher, almost at the waist, and led the owner into that cut of the ground where the wheel of the cars did not reach and the light of the headlights beat skewed, losing strength. The man cursed, not out of anger, but out of pain that finally overcame anesthesia. A shredded knee, a tear in his shin, a shoulder he had scraped into the concrete. And yet, this spasm of pain served as a neurological break. For a second, his consciousness cleared enough to obey the movement of the dog. It wasn't full cooperation, but it was less resistance. And that night, less resistance was synonymous with more life. The cars continued to spit out light and noise, now more rhythmic, as if an invisible current was pushing them. The dog synchronized his effort with this cadence. He waited for the loudest passage, stabilized the owner, and, in the interval, pulled with everything, tearing the pants into fibers, making the body scratch the earth like a crooked signature. The margin widened a span, then another half until an old guardrail, slightly bulging with the base covered by brush and debris, appeared in a reachable distance. There, yes, was the first promise of an out of reach, a line of metal between the two and the flow of steel. Approaching that barrier became a goal. The dog redrawn the angle, pointed its snout, pressed its shoulder into the man's hip and, in a brief, violent sequence of tugs, made its way through the furrow of dirt. The owner tried to sit down, pathetic and heroic at the same time, and the movement, albeit rough, helped. The dog passed from behind, pushed with its chest, and the body finally rolled under the curve of the guardrail, knocking over dry leaves, crumpled cans, and an empty bottle that rolled, emitting a tired glass sound. The noise of the next truck came thick and long, but this time the impact was on the side. On this side, only the residual tremor, the pounding heart, and a new silence landing between the beats. The dog released the bite for the first time in a long time. He took a step back, as one who checks from the outside the work he has just erected, and looked the owner up and down. There was dirt in the mouth, a fillet of blood in the corner, the front paws marked by scratches. He took a breath, panting in waves that shook his chest, and then brought his muzzle closer to the man's arm, a gentle, short, precise touch, a wordless, "We're here," confirmation that the worst had gotten a little further away. The man, lying on his side, felt the ringing like an internal bell, a callback. The air came and went, and for the first time that night the lungs seemed to agree with the head. Getting off the road was no longer a war, it was a necessity. Behind the barrier, the ground was fluffier. There was a strip of grass that gave off the smell of wet green, mixed with that of oil and iron. The dog tried to drive the owner a little more, not out of paranoia, but by method. Distance is safety. He bit less hard, pushed more with his body, inviting the man to collaborate. He could not stand, but dragged his heel, bending his knee at an angle that helped the spin. 2 movements like that, and the two positioned themselves in the fit that the terrain offered. A slope recess, a kind of irregular cradle that protected from an involuntary return to the asphalt. When the next car passed, the headlight beam barely touched both of them. The road went by itself, as if the scene had been hastily removed from the stage. The relief didn't come like fireworks. It came like a silence that hadn't existed 5 seconds before. It is curious to note how absence can be more sonorous than presence. The absence of immediate risk, the absence of the hot breath that pushed, the absence of the fear that swallows even thought. The man, still dizzy, noticed it first with his skin. The air a little colder, the grass brushing his forearm, the spine supported by the slope of the earth. Then, with the ear, the engines now passed far away without the metallic indentation of the noise by the ear. Finally, with his eyes, there was an iron bar between him and the road, and leaning against him, panting, a pair of unblinking eyes, the dog licked his dirty hand. It was not any affection, it was a check, a report. "You are here." He didn't relax completely. The tail lifted a little, but the ears remained attentive, oscillating with each new sound. At times like this, the body learns that relief is a transient state, and vigilance a tool. Only when 2 cars passed in sequence without causing any kind of threatening air displacement did the dog lower the tension a tone. He approached the owner's face, almost leaned his forehead against his, breathing together, as if tuning into the beat. And it was in this frequency shared that the man gave his first clear sign of return, a kind of laughter whimpering, aching and sincerely grateful, if without words. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because getting to a safe place seems like a simple step when narrated from afar. But in practice it is a transformation. What changes is not just the geography, from one side of the grid to the other, from asphalt to dirt. What changes is the mindset. Safety is built on micro-decisions, on quick readings of the terrain, on accepting that sometimes the ugliest route is the only one that saves you. There is a hidden truth in this crossing. The 4-legged hero is not born at the time of fright. He is trained behind the scenes every day by observation, by affection, by the habit of being together. When the moment comes, what explodes in courage is the sum of all that has been quietly nurtured. And on the side of those who have been saved, the first harvest is this intimate reconfiguration, understanding that absolute control is illusion, and that when someone drags you to the right side, the best you can do is trust. Safety, in this logic, is not just a place. It is a decision that when you can't make it, someone else makes it for you. The dawn, on the other side, resumed its usual life. On this side, time slowed down. The dog lay down for a moment, not as a rest but as a strategy to calm the owner. The warm weight of the leaning body said what the tongue could not yet articulate: "You are not alone." The man raised his hand to his head, found a small cock, licked his parched lips and felt the taste of iron and dust. When he tried to speak, the voice came out harsh, squeezed. The dog's name came first as a breath, then as a whole word: And in that sound there was a guileless apology and a speechless thank you. The dog responded with the slightest movement of his eyebrows. Yes, dogs do. And a sigh that deflated his chest as if deflating a balloon. There were small details that, gathered together, made up the picture of the relief. The wallet, once lost, now forgotten, motionless among stones, the erased cell phone, trapped in a fold of cloth, a loose shoelace that, almost, did not get tangled at the base of the wall. The vegetal smell of grass overcoming, finally, the industrial smell of oil. All around, the low-key chorus of the night city, a distant compressor, a snapping lamppost, a window that opened and closed in a neighboring building. None of that mattered. What mattered was the realization. There was room to breathe. And, where there is room to breathe, the first possibility to decide better is born. The dog, even exhausted, made one last technical gesture. He circled his own body between the man and the guardrail, creating a living wall, a barrier of hair and bone that would prevent any involuntary movement towards the track. It's almost funny how the intelligence of instinct always finds a simple way to solve the complex. The owner, still turbid, accepted the outline. He settled his shoulder in the curve of the slope and let the weight surrender to the welcome of the earth. His heart was still racing after the beat of the engines, but he was already beginning to learn the language of the long seconds, the one in which a minute becomes a minute again. A warm breeze passed over the two, scattering a fine dust that shone like stardust in the rest of the light. The dog closed his eyes for half a second, only to open them with that non-negotiable alacrity. The man watched him as if looking at an old photograph, recognizing and at the same time seeing for the first time a memory of mornings in the yard, of bitten old balls, of naps on the couch paraded through his head, and like everything in drunkenness, came in fragments. Still, a thread of understanding made contact. It wasn't full lucidity, but it was enough to call what they lived by the name it deserved: rescue. Across the road, the shadow of a tree danced a slow choreography, informing that the wind had changed direction. The dog understood the message practically. If the air came from behind, less dust on the owner's face, more comfort to breathe. He repositioned himself once more a little ahead, as one who projects his body to break the wind. This kind of care is invisible most of the time. It only appears when we learn to look. And this is another revelation that the scene brings. True care is almost always silent, and because it is silent, it is beaten, until the day he saves you. Gradually, the sensations of man began to organize a line of meaning. The leg burned in the same place. The shoulder throbbed like a soft drum. The throat asked for water, but above that there was a restart of control. He tested moving his fingers, tested pushing the earth with the sole of his shoe, tested lifting a span of the trunk. The body responded with economy, but responded. The dog, attentive, interpreted the gesture as a sign that he could exchange traction for escort. Without biting anything, just touching the flank, he guided the man a little more, a semicircle, to the point where the margin made a kind of natural step. There, sitting was less risky than slipping. This step became the first chair of the evening. The owner sat down, half glued to the wall, and supported the weight with his hand on the floor. The dog also sat, millimeters in front, in a position between alert and rest. The breath of the two found harmony. Not identical, but close enough to communicate what it needed. We have arrived. We do not arrive as someone who crosses a finish line and raises a trophy. We arrive as someone who steps, finally, on an island after swimming against the current. The difference is subtle and total. And on this makeshift island, the man's mind began to make room for better questions. Not the ones who accuse, "Why did I do that?" but the ones that transform and are, "What do I do now?" The road kept doing what the road does: take and bring. On this side, another road was born, small and deep, which begins when we breathe and admit that we need to choose differently. Perhaps this is the greatest beauty of the word safe. It not only protects, it gives back the chance to decide. The dog, without any philosophy, had just returned to the owner the most powerful tool in life, the possibility of a next choice. So when the man leaned his forehead against the cold metal of the guardrail and let a dry sob escape, it was not despair. It was relief turning into promise, albeit formless. The dog, faithful to the role he doesn't even know he has, just raised his ears and remained there, whole, as a bridge between what was and what can be. On the other side, a car passed slowly. Maybe someone noticed a different shadow behind the wall, maybe not. It's not important. There are stories that choose discretion as a stage and precisely for this reason, reach deeper. The immediate risk was controlled, but the night had not lost its thickness. The head still weighed, the body still ached, the road still roared. And yet, something irrefutable had changed. If you pay close attention, you can hear when life shifts gears. Sometimes it's a click, sometimes it's a sigh. That early morning it was the almost inaudible sound of a canine tongue touching a human hand, followed by the silence that only exists after the almost. It's the kind of sound you don't forget. He says, "I'm on this journey too." The man remained leaning against the guardrail for long seconds, trying to regain the rhythm of his own breathing. The feeling was that the heart, still racing, needed time to believe that the immediate danger had passed. The dog, attentive, did not tear his eyes away, only wagging his ears at each distant noise from the road. There was something in that shared silence that said more than any words could translate. It was as if the mere fact that they were together, alive, breathing the same air laden with dust and oil, was enough to redraw the whole logic of that dawn. The man brought his trembling hand to the animal's fur, squeezing it with what strength he still had left. The touch was not just physical. It was a gesture charged with recognition, almost an apology for not having realized before the extent of the risk he was taking. Tears, which until then had been hiding under the weight of confusion and adrenaline, began to appear without warning. They ran down his dirty face, mixing with dust and sweat, but the man did not try to contain them. It was as if, in that instant, the defenses finally surrendered to the hidden truth that the dog already knew from the beginning, that he would not have gotten there without that companion. The dog responded by licking the salt off his skin, as if to say, in his silent language, that everything was right, that the effort had been worth it. This simple moment, almost too intimate to describe, carried an enormous impact, the weight of a revelation that unfolds without speech. Gradually, gratitude took the form of a clear thought in the mind of man. He finally understood the gravity of the situation. Every beacon that passed inches away, every honk that echoed like a sentence, could have been the end, and it wasn't. What made the difference was not a rational calculation, not an escape plan, but the stubborn insistence of a being driven by something greater than fear: loyalty. This word, so repeated in stories and clichés, at that moment gained real density. It wasn't just about affection. It was about surrender, about a confidence that does not shake in the face of danger. And there, sitting on the cold ground, the man realized that there was something beyond the animal instinct. There was a decision, albeit a silent one, made by the dog. The decision not to let go, to resist to the limit, to ignore exhaustion and keep pulling, even when it seemed impossible. This realization seeped into his mind like a powerful revelation. If even a being who lives by instinct is capable of such profound choices, how much more can we, who carry consciousness and reasoning, decide to transform the course of our journey? The bond between the two revealed itself as a mirror, showing that trust is built both in small everyday gestures and in the great heroic acts that suddenly arise. The man remembered ordinary mornings when the dog just lay next to him waiting for a piece of bread, or lazy afternoons when the animal seemed to have no other purpose than to follow his steps around the house. Only now did I understand that these moments were the silent backstage that set the scene for the evening. Because trust is not born out of nothing, it is built in the repeated detail, in the gaze that always meets, in the silence that never weighs. It is this invisible accumulation that in the face of danger turns into an irresistible force. Gratitude grew with each memory. The man held the leash not as an accessory, but as a symbolic link, an invisible chain that had kept him alive. There was pain in the body, scratches, dried blood, but none of this seemed to matter. What mattered was the clarity that emerged in that instant. He owed his life to his dog, and even more profoundly, it also required a change of mindset, because surviving that night wasn't just about getting off the road. It was about realizing that there was something at stake greater than recklessness itself. It was recognizing that life had given him a second chance, and that chance came with responsibility. The dog, oblivious to human reflections, only leaned against the body, creating warmth against the dawn cold. But without knowing it, he became a living metaphor for something essential: the importance of presence. Sometimes it's not about saving with grandiose gestures, but about standing there, steadfast, even when the other falls apart. This simple but transformative revelation marked the man with the force of an invisible tattoo. He understood now that trust is not just hoping the other is around. It is believing that even when everything seems to fall apart, there will be someone, or something, willing to fight to the end. And it is curious how, at the moment when the plug finally falls, there is also the soft shame of not having recognized this before. The man stroked the dog not only as a thank you, but as an inner promise, to pay more attention, to value more, to give back in some way. Gratitude, when it is true, is not content to be a passing emotion. It requires transformation. And it was at this point that he began to understand that the bond he shared with the animal was also a practical lesson in choice. And it is curious how, at the moment when the plug finally falls, there is also the soft shame of not having recognized this before. The man stroked the dog not only as a thank you, but as an inner promise to pay more attention, to value more, to give back in some way. Gratitude, when it is true, is not content to be a passing emotion. It requires transformation, and it was at this point that he began to understand that the bond he shared with the animal was also a practical lesson in choices, because the trust that saves a life is only maintained if it is nurtured every day. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because gratitude is not just a feeling that warms the heart. It is a turning point. Behind the scenes of our journey, how we react to what we receive defines the impact it will have on our lives. Some people get help and carry on as if nothing had happened. Others, when saved, carry forever a mark that transforms every future decision. It is in this contrast that the hidden truth of gratitude. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because gratitude is not just a feeling that warms the heart, it is a turning point. Behind the scenes of our journey, how we react to what we receive defines the impact it will have on our lives. Some people get help and carry on as if nothing had happened. Others, when saved, carry forever a mark that transforms every future decision. It is in this contrast that the hidden truth of gratitude is revealed. It can be only a fleeting emotion, or it can become a fuel for change. The choice depends on how you decide to honor what you have received. The man with his face against the dog's fur was beginning to feel it pulsing within him. He didn't want that episode to be just a scare memory. He wanted it to be the beginning of a new way of living, because life had already shown in a brutal way that there are no guarantees. And if, nevertheless, there was still time left, it was because there was something to be done. His mentality was gradually reconfiguring itself. It wasn't just gratitude for the physical rescue. The man with his face against the dog's fur was beginning to feel it pulsing within him. He didn't want that episode to be just a scare memory. He wanted it to be the beginning of a new way of living, because life had already shown in a brutal way that there are no guarantees. And if, nevertheless, there was still time left, it was because there was something to be done. His mentality was gradually reconfiguring itself. It wasn't just gratitude for the physical rescue, but an understanding of the emotional and spiritual impact it carried. And perhaps this is exactly the most powerful point of the whole scene, realizing that true bonds not only save lives, but also reveal paths. The dog didn't just push the owner away from death, it put him in front of a new way of seeing his own journey. And that changes everything. Because when trust is established at this level, you discover that you are not just living. You are constantly learning from every experience, from every rescue, from every revelation. The man wiped away tears with the back of his hand, took a deep breath, and closed his eyes for an instant. When he opened them, he found the dog's attentive eyes again, as if there was nothing more important in the world than watching that moment. A lump formed in the throat, but not from pain, from bowing. And as dawn broke, he knew something had changed forever. He says, "That makes sense to me." The man was still trying to rearrange his thoughts when he realized. The man was still trying to rearrange his thoughts when he realized that the news of what had happened would not be long in spreading. The road that had almost become his end was now the scene of an episode that would inevitably draw the attention of everyone around him. Soon, friends, neighbors, and even strangers began to comment. Some even said they had heard of the story. Others who witnessed part of the scene from afar, and were impressed by the courage of the animal. In a few hours, that intimate moment between man and dog became a collective affair, almost as if the heroic act ceased to be just personal to become a public example. And that, in a way, magnified the impact of what had happened. It was not only a life saved, it was a narrative of transformation that also touched the perception of the people around. When the man, still frail, took the dog to a veterinarian to check that there were no injuries caused by the effort, the reaction was immediate. The professional Akas, when the man, still frail, took the dog to a veterinarian to check that there were no injuries caused by the effort, the reaction was immediate. The professional, accustomed to dealing with different types of animal behavior, did not hide his admiration. He looked at the dog as one who recognizes something rare, an instinctive decision that goes beyond simple obedience or ordinary bonding. "That's not just instinct," he remarked, as he carefully examined each paw, each muscle strained by the effort of the night before. "This dog made a conscious decision to take a risk to protect you. It's an extraordinary act." These words echoed within the man like a seal of authority. It wasn't just the personal thrill of being saved. There was now an external confirmation that the episode did indeed have a special dimension. Experts explained that dogs have protective instincts, but that in situations of extreme risk like that, most animals could paralyze with fear or even move away from danger. What made that moment singular was precisely the dog's unwavering insist. These words echoed within the man like a seal of authority. It wasn't just the personal thrill of being saved, and the more he listened to these analyses, the more he understood that he was facing something that could not be reduced to a simple coincidence. It was, yes, a rescue, but also a call to see beyond the surface. Because often when someone external validates an experience we have had, the hidden truth that once seemed subjective becomes impossible to ignore. And that's exactly what happened. The experts' comments opened up a new layer of understanding. The neighbors, upon learning of the story, began to look at the dog with different eyes. It was no longer just the animal that barked when someone passed in front of the gate. It was now the hero, the guardian who had braved death to save a life. This change in the way the external world perceived him also generated an internal transformation in the owner, because when he saw the admiring glances directed at the dog, he understood even more clearly that he had witnessed something rare, something worthy of being remembered and honored. And it's interesting to note how public recognition has the power to amplify a personal experience. That heroic act didn't gain importance just because there were experts or neighbors confirming its greatness. It became even more significant because it revealed, behind the scenes of the human journey, the way we value certain gestures when they receive external validation. The collective mentality in this case reinforced the perception that it was not just about survival, but about an extraordinary event. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this external recognition leads us to reflect on something essential. Why do we often only value certain experiences when someone from the outside confirms what we have lived? Why do we need an expert, a neighbor, or a friend to validate the impact of something in order to accept that it was great? That's a powerful revelation about our mindset. Most of our decisions, our feelings, and even our memories only gain strength when they are echoed in the voice of other people. It's as if we need the reflection of the world to believe in the intensity of what we already know inside. And here there is an even deeper lesson. Recognition, when it comes from outside, can be a trigger for transformation, but it should not be the only basis for the value we give to our experiences. The dog did not need applause or praise to act. He simply did what he believed was necessary. His heroism did not depend on witnesses, headlines, or experts, and that is exactly why his action has such an impact, because it was pure, silent, with no expectation of reward. This is the kind of attitude that carries a hidden truth, that the real value of an action is not in recognition, but in the purpose that sustains it. At the same time, the fact that the outside world confirmed the heroism of the dog also brought something important to the owner, the chance to turn gratitude into responsibility. Because when others recognize the value of something you have lived, you come to see that you not only have a story to tell but also an example to carry. The impact expands, and your personal journey gains the dimension of inspiration. And perhaps that is exactly what begins to unfold at this point in the narrative. It was no longer just about a man saved by his dog. It was about a community touched by courage, about experts reinforcing the awesomeness of the act, about neighbors spreading the story as indirect witnesses to an everyday miracle. And in the midst of this whirlwind of perceptions, the owner understood that by recognizing the heroism of his dog, he was also being called to reflect on his own life. Because if even an animal is capable of such surrender, what would be the choices that he as a conscious human being should make from there? This question was neither light nor simple. She carried weight, demanded change. But at the same time, it had a liberating power. Because recognizing the heroism of the dog was, in a way, recognizing that within each of us, there is also the capacity for decisions that can transform destinies. Perhaps not on dangerous roads, not always in extreme moments, but often in the silent backdrops of everyday life, when a seemingly small decision has the impact of saving someone, of transforming a journey, of changing the course of a story. And it is at this point that we realize how extraordinary every detail can become. The look of neighbors, the veterinarian's comment, the emotion of friends, all this reinforced a single truth, that courage is not something distant, unattainable, reserved for movie heroes. It can be by our side, in the form of an animal that acts without hesitation, and it can be within us, waiting only for the right moment to manifest itself. He says, "I'm on this journey too." The silence that followed the episode seemed to carry an invisible weight. The owner, still stunned, felt his whole body vibrating with the adrenaline rush that was only now beginning to dissipate. He looked at the dog, who was panting, but kept his eyes fixed on him with an almost human firmness, as if to assure himself that everything was all right. It was impossible not to be moved by that scene, because in that instant, a hidden truth was revealed. Dogs can perceive dangers that we, with all our rationality, often cannot see. They don't calculate. They don't analyze every detail like we do. They just feel it. They feel before, they act before, they trust instincts that go beyond any logical explanation. And it was this realization, almost supernatural, that saved a life that night. The impact of this revelation began to expand within man. He understood that he had not only been saved from a physical tragedy, but that he had also received an emotional, almost spiritual lesson. The dog had shown in the flesh that loyalty and love are not just beautiful words, but forces capable of transforming realities, and this led him to reflect. How many times in his journey had he ignored signs, silenced intuitions, closed his eyes to the alerts that life gave in different forms? Maybe it wasn't always car horns or truck headlights, but forebodings, discomforts, little truths that whispered amid the noise of everyday life. This experience, both painful and redemptive, showed him that the mentality we carry in the face of situations defines what we can learn from them. An ordinary man might have looked upon that night as merely an accident averted by luck. But he did not want to reduce the intensity of what he had experienced to a mere coincidence. He preferred to see it as a profound revelation, a reminder that there are forces that push us out of harm's way, even when we don't understand what's going on. And that, for the most part, these forces come packaged in genuine affection, quiet loyalty, and unconditional love. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what the dog showed that morning is something that goes beyond the relationship between human and animal. It is a living metaphor about the importance of trusting those who are next to us, about the value of bonds that do not break even in the face of chaos. In our own decisions, how often do we fail to listen to those who, from the outside, perceive risks that we cannot see? How many times have we resisted the pull that could save us simply because we believe we know more, because we let ourselves be dominated by pride or stubbornness? This is a harsh but essential reflection. We are not as self-sufficient as we imagine. The dog, with its heroic act, became not only a guardian of the owner's life, but also a mirror, reflecting human fragility and the need to trust. This is the part that excites, because we all carry stories in which someone, in silence, protected us from something we did not realize. It may have been a friend who urged us not to take a dangerous path, a family member who warned us about a risky decision, or even life itself, pushing us in directions that at the time seemed painful but later revealed their purpose. This journey reveals a simple but powerful truth. Loyalty and love are more than feelings. They are active forces, capable of changing destinies. And just like that dog who did not hesitate in the face of danger, perhaps life is constantly showing us that when we are guided by these values, we find the courage to cross any road, no matter how threatening it may seem. He said, "That makes sense to me." This dog story is not just a tale of courage, it is a reminder that often the greatest heroes walk silently by our side, asking for nothing in return but love and care. He did not think of risk, he did not calculate probabilities, he did not seek recognition, he simply acted. And this pure action driven by loyalty shows us that there are forms of heroism that do not need grandiose words or fluttering cloaks. Every second he resisted, every tug of strength, every determined look was living proof that true transformation is born from absolute surrender to what we believe to be important. This scene carries a hidden truth. Sometimes what saves our lives is not just someone's physical strength, but the emotional impact of a gesture that transcends the rational. The dog not only took the owner away from danger, it also opened doors for deep reflection on decisions, on mentality, and on the way we deal with the battles of everyday life. It is behind the scenes of our journey that we discover that love and courage are tools as powerful as any planned strategy. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because if we stop to think, this story also speaks about us. How often are we called to act, not out of logic or expediency, but out of what we feel is right, even if no one is looking? How many times can a simple gesture completely change someone's fate? The dog teaches us that we do not have to wait for perfect conditions to act, that the right moment is always the one in which we perceive the risk and decide not to cross our arms. This dog showed us that four-legged heroes exist and that every second can make a difference. If this story moved you, leave your like, share it with someone who loves dogs, and subscribe to the channel for more amazing stories of animal heroism. He says, I'm on this journey too. If you made it this far, it's because this story really touched on some point inside you. And that's exactly the kind of connection I want to keep building around here. So if it makes sense, subscribe to the channel so as not to miss the next stories that bring reflections as intense as this one. And since you stayed until the end, leave there in the comments the phrase, I'm with you until the end, so I will know who really shared this journey with me until the last second. Oh, and also leave your like, because it shows that the content made a difference in your day. And look, no need to stop here. There is a video here on the side that complements this subject in a surprising way. Click and continue with me there, because our conversation still has a lot to yield.